Uh, it is preparing. I don't know if this is going out, but if it is, hello, welcome to the Recover Yourself podcast. Nope, this is not the Recover Yourself podcast. This is the Recover Yourself workshop. I'm very excited to be able to, we're going to mute that. I'm very excited to be able to have this workshop. It's work that I have been doing for a long time, and it is, there have been a lot of people that have been talking about and doing work like this for a long time. And I want to just be able to credit everybody that has contributed to the idea of recovering the whole self and full mind and body work. I want to thank treatment centers that are doing this work, because it is not necessarily all of the it doesn't get all the accolades that probably it should or it will one day, but it is very important that we allow people to have their recovery the way that they need their recovery. My recovery was gained through understanding that it was about where I was recovering to, not what I was recovering from. Because, and I found this out over the last 20 years of my sobriety and of my recovery process, that I'm going to recover from many, many, many things. But it is what I am recovering to, or who I am recovering into, that makes all the difference and makes recovery possible from anything. So I can recover from a diagnosis of MS, which I received 6 years ago. I can recover from depression, which I experienced throughout my sobriety. And I can recover from alcohol and drug abuse, which is what started all of this. Tobacco, I've recovered from. I've recovered from so many things, and they're all the same when we understand what it is we're recovering to. We don't know what we're recovering to unless we're thinking clearly. And this workshop is about being able to show counselors, as well as to show counselors how this works, where the rubber meets the road in our lives, as well as giving them an idea of what it is they can offer their clients, so that when their clients are no longer their clients, they are still on a path of recovering to, and not simply recovering from. Because when they leave us as counselors, what ends up happening is they have for a time been sober or clean or not using, whatever, however, if it's shopping or if it's overeating or if it's anything, they have been for a time clean and sober, but they might not know where they're going. And so what happens when we recover from is we like to put things down, right? We stop using, we don't use these things. And so we end up empty-handed. And when we walk away, we might feel like we're strong because we're no longer carrying this huge weight. But we might not be carrying anything because we're focused so much on what we're recovering from. So it's all about putting down and keeping an eye on that thing that we put down to make sure it doesn't come back in. Well, because our entire focus is still on that which we are recovering from. If we're recovering from cocaine, cocaine owns the conversation. And then we may just as easily pick up cocaine as maybe another drug or alcohol or another dysfunctional activity. And so recovering ourselves is about being able to be ourselves, being able to be fluid with who we are day to day, and constantly be in a state of questioning, who is this that I am, and how am I growing into who I am? So that is what we have today. And we're going to start talking about these things. It's going to take about an hour to go through. We're going to go over a number of things. At the core of everything we talk about is this idea of recovering yourself. And how do we do that? How do we continue questioning where we are not ourselves, where we are taking on the ideas of others, where we are taking on the ideas of our past, where we are taking on the ideas of our own complaints about ourselves, and why. Like inside, we all really want to love ourselves, and we can, but we need to get past a lot of things that tell us that we're not lovable, that tell us we're not worth it. So this is We're going to be doing an hour of this foundational stuff. I do have more workshops coming up next Tuesday and the following 2 Tuesdays. So every Tuesday in February, we'll be doing a Recover Yourself workshop. This is only the first hour. This is a 3-hour workshop that we actually sit down. If you were to sign up, sit down and actually go through the process of an exercise, if you will, of understanding how to find that which we are engaging in that doesn't allow us to be ourselves. So if you are a counselor, if you're an organization, most of the tickets that we utilize, that I sell for these are for organizations, because for $100, you can get all of your counselors into this workshop so that they can, one, have the information, but two, also all of your counselors went to the same workshop. So as an education, they can continue talking about this and elevating the conversation further within your organization. It's a $100 base ticket for everyone in your organization. If you have a national company, this could very well benefit you, because you can have hundreds of people come through 4 or 5 different dates, and they would all earn their CEUs and be able to have the conversation of recovering yourself nationally. And that's something that I'm really interested in. I want to get this message out to as many people as possible. So organizations like Rose Grants can come in. All of their counselors can come, and this is a NADAC approved workshop. So you would be able to offer all of your counselors, no matter what state they were in, 3 NADAC CEs. So after we're done here, I would encourage you to, if it's interesting, if it's something that you want to learn more about, I would encourage you to go and spread the word to your organization, or also talk to your fellow counselors, because there are group discounts as well. A large part of what we're going to be talking about is about things that we've inadvertently given up. As soon as we're born, we are bombarded with information about what is expected of us and who we're supposed to be for our parents, and then our teachers, and then our partners and our bosses, and everybody wants something from us. And so it's much easier to abide by those requests rather than step back and try and fight those requests. So as we're children and growing up, we start to frame the world through the eyes of other people. And our special talents and our gifts and the things aren't always going to be in line with that. And so as we grow, we learn and we teach ourselves to stuff down some of those things. And that is a very tough thing to live with. And that sort of action is what kind of takes us into addiction of all sorts. Now, when I talk about addiction today, I'm going to be talking about a wide variety of addictions. We're going to start calling them pacifiers once we get into the workshop. The reason I like to call them pacifiers is so people don't say, well, I'm not addicted to reading. But if you're utilizing reading as a pacifier, that could inhibit your ability to grow and advance. This is all about, instead of asking the question what, we start asking about the question why. What I want to do is get people curious. It's not about what I'm using, whether it's reading or exercising or cocaine or heroin, right? It's not about what it is. It's why am I turning to that? Why do I have these pacifiers? Why do I drink coffee every morning? Those are the questions we want to ask, because when we ask the question of, well, why am I doing this? We can get curious. Instead of coming at it from a punitive perspective, instead of coming at it from a place where we're looking at it as judgmentally, we're looking at it in a judgmental way, what we can do is grow in curiosity about our actions and why we take them the way that we do. So underneath our desire for explanations is always a story that's already been written, and it got written by us usually when we were children. Now, there are traumatic events that we experience in which, or there are traumatic responses that we have that are not necessarily driven by impact events in our lives. And this workshop will also help you understand and point towards that which is troubling. I also have a workshop that I'm currently developing entitled Triangulating Trauma. And this is for trauma just like this, trauma in which exists in our lives, but we don't have a specific impact event that caused it. In order to find that and hone it, suss it out, and be able to heal from that, we are going to want to triangulate that trauma and figure out whereabouts it is. As we do the work that we're going to go through today, you're going to want to be patient. You're going to want to allow yourself time and space to be able to explore all of the things that we talk about, because this is at the core of just being. And that's the idea of recovering yourself. How can we recover a space of just being who we are without having to be successful in the way that culture wants it, without having to be forceful the way like our father may have wanted us to be, or caring the way our mother wanted us to be, or whatever. Like, we want to be able to define those things new for ourselves today. Okay. And where is I am looking for, there it is. I had the wrong tools up. So here we go. We are all set now. Recover Yourself workshop. We are moving on into the first slide. So thank you for showing up. I really appreciate it. If you're watching this recording, I hope it's enjoyable enough that you can check it all out. We all want to distract ourselves all the time. We are currently living in a world that is filled with dopamine response things. And depression is probably at an all-time high, especially with COVID and everything else that's going on in the world today. And that is causing people to want to feel comfortable in an even more increased way. People want to just be comfortable. And I get it. Comfort is king, especially when we put ourselves through so much in the world today that is uncomfortable. Our jobs, our relationships, maybe. Like, we are transitioning out of the old and into a new paradigm in which nobody knows what the rules are. And so it's uncomfortable. It is extremely and exceedingly uncomfortable. And yet, the world is increasing, and so maybe I should say, and so the world is increasing in how it wants to help you be comfortable, right? Like, there are more and more products on the market, more and more workshops. I mean, even this one, more and more coaches and more advice and more locations where you can feel comfortable and you can get your little dip of adrenaline or your little dip of dopamine every day. But a tiny, tiny shift of awareness can help us figure out, well, do we need this? And that's what we want to do today. I'm not interested in getting you from point A to point Z, and you're going to be leaving this workshop dancing and waving your hands in the air, really excited about living your life. That's not going to happen. And I know a lot of people want that to happen. And they want to be like, oh, I'm dancing and I feel good and my life is completely different. Well, if that was the case, you'd go home and your life wouldn't be completely different. It would actually be the same as it always was. And you probably wouldn't make the big shift that we need you to make in this time of transition. What we need is for you to make a tiny shift of awareness, a tiny shift of curiosity. And that, over time, makes the biggest shift. Because if I can get you curious today about your life, then tomorrow you're going to remain curious. If I get you really, really happy, and then something happens when you go home, well, you're going to revert to everything that you've done before. And you wouldn't have made a change. And over time, you're just going to be the same person you were. I don't want to give you a dopamine response. I want to give you a very calm response. I want to give you something that's pretty subdued, actually, because that is what makes the biggest difference. It is not you stepping out and making the big, big change. It's you making a little change today. Yes, big changes can happen. And if you change your entire life in one day, great. Um, but if I can get you to make a tiny shift in the way you think, then that is going to change the way you think tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And that is going to make a huge impact on your life over time. So that's I want to make sure that we're clear on what you can expect for today. And we all want to distract ourselves a little bit, and we do that so often by practicing awareness avoidance, which is why if I get you really happy and you go home and you haven't switched your awareness level, you won't change. The problem with wanting to practice awareness avoidance is that we're inadvertently asking things outside of us, usually a dopamine, like in order to get a dopamine response, we ask things outside of us to fill our lives with the exact thing that awareness is going to bring. Awareness over dopamine is like that's the equation I'm looking for. I don't want you to trust your dopamine, because your dopamine is going to guide you down a path that you don't really know. You don't know where it's taking you. You don't know why it's taking you there. Your dopamine is just leading you on to probably get more dopamine. Now, when you don't trust things, you look outside of yourself to trust things. You get, maybe you get to be a part of a group, and that group is solid. That group has rules, and those rules mean that you can trust that if A plus B equals C, then C is always going to happen. Politics is a place where rules and trust have been lost because the rules that they abided by or that they wrote, they don't abide by. And so we learn really quickly you can't trust the government. You can't trust police, because police are tending to do things that force us to say, look, Black Lives Matter. Like, oh my God, how can you not understand this? We look at the insurrection that happened last month, and we see that they didn't treat those people the same way they treated Black Lives Matter. And those people that were doing the insurrecting were definitely should have been treated with more force than we treated Black Lives Matter. And yet that wasn't the case. Security, same sort of thing. When I feel insecure, I can get my dopamine fix very easily by getting a security system, or, buying a product that tells me I'm secure. I don't know how often I have to hear TV ads talk to me about breaking a hip, or getting ill, or getting an illness, and there being medication for that illness. These medication ads are really scary, and they start to injure our ability to feel secure or safe in our body. And so what we do is we start to play this thing, and the fear comes up, and as that fear comes up, we need a way to solve that fear. And what we can do is purchase a product. And these are things that it's just an interaction, it's just transactional between us and our dopamine, or us and a company, or us and a product, or us and other people. Like all of these things can cause us to feel uncomfortable. And as we feel uncomfortable, what we want to do is we want to fill that space with something. We want to feel abundant. And in order to feel abundant, we buy stuff. In order to feel confident, we may talk down to people, where it's going to make us feel uncomfortable. And by feeling uncomfortable, we will practice awareness avoidance. And as we practice awareness avoidance, we step away and we start to not feel. We don't feel that lack of safety, because we're too droned out by how many books we have to read every month, how many TV shows we're following, how many like what's going on in politics, like that discomfort can become normal. I don't want to say comfortable, but it can become familiar to a point that it causes me to want to engage in pacifiers like Facebook, or purchasing something, or my drug of choice. So to recover from is the most important part of any recovery. And whether you're recovering from like your discomfort, whether you're recovering from your pardon me, your discomfort or a drug or alcohol, or if you're recovering from any number of things that make you feel uncomfortable, especially if you don't feel abundant, and then you engage in something to make you feel abundant, and then you just the next day you don't feel abundant anymore, right? Like that's a cycle that we engage in regularly. Shopping is something that really that sort of thing is like shopping addiction is something that emulates very closely. Now, to only focus on what we're recovering from, we associate our recovery with the things that we're trying to separate from, right? We're trying to separate from feeling not confident, from our drug of choice, from gambling or whatever. And so as we step away from that, we don't actually shift our focus. Our focus goes from having cocaine every day to not having cocaine every day. And that's how recovering from kind of is framed in a very simple way, right? Like my focus is still on not doing that which I was doing, on that thing. I know, like, I have over 20 years alcohol free. I would not be able to have had that had I focused solely on alcohol. If I just said, okay, well, I can't drink alcohol or use drugs for the next 20 years, well, that would have put an enormous amount of strain on me, an enormous amount of stress on me, and would not have been helpful. So I believe, and this is really what built my long-term sobriety, is the idea that recovering too is born, like long-term recovery is born out of this idea of recovering to what am I moving towards, how am I doing this, and what is the point. To recover ourselves is work we do to strengthen and expand our lives. It is not about closing off. Where recovering from is about closing off. Of course, your life expands with sobriety, but if you're only talking about what is it we're recovering from, then it's limiting. You're limiting yourself. And this is when people get into the problem of saying, like, well, now that I'm sober, I have to do this. What am I supposed to do? Like, if the focus that so much that's coming up today that really is that I'm cautious of, is so many people saying, well, I don't drink alcohol, but I'm going to engage in all of these new beverages that are on the market. And I'm like, well, that's still a pacifier, right? Like, you're still pacifying yourself from something. It's fine if that is a path to getting yourself clean and sober or whatnot, but that's still really focused on recovering from. And it's okay. Like getting a job, while you're in or as you get out of your ILP program, is still this recovering from, because they focus only, it's the focus is, oh, you've done it. You've gotten a job, but they're not going to be able to keep that job if that was the big win, because that big win is a big shot of dopamine, and is a big shot of euphoric feeling of being useful and stuff, and that's great. But we want to make sure that we keep the bar open. We keep especially for us as counselors. If we can do this for us as counselors, we can dig deep and understand that we are recovering to something. Then we can celebrate their win for their job while keeping it a sobering experience. It is not something that we're going to fly off the handle and say you're done, because you're not. And we know that. We know that they're not done. So recovering ourselves launches lives that are self-guided, so that our clients don't continue to have to come back to us. I know a lot of us, especially therapists and things, like our livelihoods may depend on people coming back, but their livelihoods and their lives depend on them not. Yes, recovery and therapy are all very, very necessary, but not forever. Like the point of getting on, I believe the point of getting on antidepressant medication is to learn techniques to get you off of antidepressant medication, because all the antidepressant medications, from my experience, and I've never taken antidepressants, just I've read and heard about, and know people who have gone through it. After a certain amount of time, the medication that you're taking is going to not work, because your body is going to fight that. You're going to need increasing dosage or whatever. And the point is to have a life that is self-guided and strong, as well as expanded, and continues to expand. And when we settle into rules that are revolved around recovering from, that limits us, continuously limits us. So today there is a desire, like through all of this sort of stuff that's shifting and transitioning in our lives, there's a desire to connect with oneself in a deeper way. And that is internal with us. And we as counselors need to recognize that, so that we can at least start that conversation with people, because they might not be ready to have that conversation with themselves or others yet. They might not be ready to talk about energy. They might not be ready to talk about how things are shifting within their lives, and things they are focused on themselves. And that's not selfish. And that's a way that we can actually give more, is when we are happy with who we are and how we are living. So memes and pop culture are coming up everywhere and showing us that, like, oh yeah, the world is shifting. And we no longer have this idea that a man wears t-shirts and jeans and that's it, and they work on cars, and that's the 70s idea of a man. Well, we've shifted from that. I, as a man, as someone who identifies as a very masculine person, even though I also embrace all of the feminine aspects. I even think that recovering too is a very divine feminine sort of way of looking at recovery, because the masculine way of looking at things is rules, regulations, and do things within the steps. Well, the feminine way is more flexible and open and airy, and has a lot of room for different ways of doing things. So as we kind of get in this, we have to adapt this idea so that we can continue talking and helping that idea get transitioned within our clients, so that our clients can continue to have a conversation about the self and recovering of the self. So it's not so small, it's not so recovering from singular focus. The desire, that desire to continue expanding ourselves, forces adding this conversation of recovering to the conversation to the recovery conversation. Because when we speak solely of recovering from, we define life as living without stuff, right? We define it as being strong and willpower and all of these things that aren't going to last anymore. They used to work 100 years ago, 80 years ago. That kind of stuff was really easy to, not really easy, that was the way forward, right? The masculine, forceful way forward was the way that we dealt with recovery. Today, we have to be more expansive. We have to be more open. We have to include more options, which is why there's not just AA, there's AA Smart and all sorts of She Recovers. There's all sorts of different ways of going about it. And the more the merrier. So due to the nature of our consumer culture, many things attempt to give us a sense of depth while only offering us some sort of escape. And that escape messes with our mind. Because we're trying to escape, what ends up happening is we escape ourselves, and we don't think clearly. And the problem with not thinking clearly is not knowing what clear thinking is. Now, this is a clip from an interview I did with Ruby Warrington, author of the book Sober Curious. And she is talking a little bit about the difference between clarity and sobriety. Anything, like, and I couldn't have said that any better. Anything that gets in the way, anything that clouds our mind, is getting in the way of our clarity. And those dopamine responses that we have from everything that we do, even if we're reading books, right? Reading books can take us out of ourselves, and that could be great. But if we're reading 15 books a month, how much of ourselves are we actually being in that month? Like, can't we just take one of those 2-day segments that we would read a book, put one book down, and then just sit and feel for a day or for 2 days? Just feel what it's like to be me, right? Um, and then maybe, and again, being curious, trying to raise our awareness and our curiosity about where we're going and what we're doing. So many of those things I like to call pacifiers. Me reading, exercise, our morning coffee, our overworking, our environment. So, like, are we cleaning it or are we keeping it cluttered just to keep our mind occupied? Is it pacifying us? So drugs and alcohol, of course, are on the top of this list, and this list is not, by any stretch of the imagination, um, a definitive list whatsoever. Television today is everywhere. I don't like. I mean, I haven't owned a television in a long time, or at least a television service, and but I have the internet, and I will put on YouTube or I will put on shows just so that I can check out for a little bit. Social media is something that the endless scrolling, I do it, and I try and stop. I put limits on my phone. When I hit those limits, I have to question, what caused me to spend more than 20 minutes on Instagram today? Right? Like, is it because I spent a long time posting something, or was I just trying to avoid something? And approaching this with curiosity rather than judgment is a huge leap, because so many people like see that and then judge it, or want to judge it, or judge it in others and judge it in ourselves, and judge. We have to understand that right now, we are experiencing judgment in a way that maybe has never been experienced before, because it's deep. We just went through 20 years of things like Maury Povich and Sally Jesse and other people who not only permitted but encouraged our judging others while not being curious about ourselves. So one of the biggest things we want to be able to do is make sure that we're reflecting and being curious about this. One of the things I like to ask at this point is, how many of you drank coffee this morning? How many of you chose to drink coffee this morning? Many of you, probably, especially if you're in the United States, chose to drink coffee this morning. But then I want to ask, how many of you actually made the choice to drink coffee today, or simply executed the decision that you made a long time ago? Many of you may have went to bed last night knowing that you were going to drink coffee today. If you're doing that, then you're not questioning, you're not being curious about why you're drinking coffee. Do you need it? And is the argument the same every day? And that the reason you need it? These are big questions we want to be asking ourselves, because if we're doing something just because we did it yesterday, do we know who we are today? Because if we don't, then we have to ask the question, well, who am I? Of course, gaming is on this list. That finally is getting added to the DSM-5. One of the things that I want to talk about now that I've mentioned the DSM-5 is that we don't want to wait for the DSM-5 to define everything for us. The DSM-5 may not have the right answers. The DSM-5 needs a lot of research in order to be able to put it in. We have to presume that the DSM-5 is behind, and that we as counselors are the people that are seeing the changes around us at every moment. We're the ones that need to be flexible. And we need to be able to look at pacifiers like these listed here. And also, we need to look at these pacifiers as if they can be addictions, because what all of these things do, or they can do for specific individuals, is give them ways of checking out and give them ways of engaging in a dopamine response. And those things, any one of these things, right? Like television can help us check out and not feel. And are we getting a dopamine response from that? No, maybe not. Maybe we are. Maybe we're just maybe we're getting a dopamine response because we're able to check out. Maybe we are, we have too much cortisol in our system because we're stressed. And so we're utilizing this as a way to relax. But are we relaxing? When you get up from the television, do you feel tired or do you feel invigorated? I mean, I usually feel exhausted after watching television for a while. So we want to, once again, be curious about what it is we're engaging and why. Because the more curious we are, the more we'll be willing to take that little step of the curiosity. If I can get you to take that little step of curiosity, in a week, you will have changed dramatically. Because if you're approaching this from not being curious, from a place of not understanding or not looking at those things like your caffeine intake, where else are you making choices today that you're going to do tomorrow before you wake up tomorrow, being who you're going to be tomorrow? So often, once we wake up, we remind ourselves of who we were yesterday so that we can be that today. That's not helping us. That's not growing. That's not pushing us to be who we can be. It's pushing us to be who we were. So where are we not showing up? Every day we have to step away from one thing or another. And although this is normal, are we taking note of the things that cause us to want to step away from what we're doing or who we're being? Just being curious. If you want to spend more time with your wife or husband and you're in their presence, are you present? It's very often that we're not. Why? Because there's so much going on. We came out of this idea of the information age. Right? The information age, we were able to get all of this information. We thought information was going to be expensive. We thought gaining information was going to be something that you paid for. But what it turned out to be is information is what they're stealing from us. like I don't want it to sound weird, but Google and YouTube or Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of these, Instagram and Facebook are the same. Google and YouTube might be the same. I don't even know. But they're all gathering information about us. And that information they are selling. And they're kind of selling it back to us. Because if we as individuals want to promote ourselves or want to get higher on our Instagram or higher numbers of followers, we have to engage in this interaction, and they are holding all of that information and selling it as advertising. And we didn't know how information was going to unfold like this. And today we are asked to be the same person we were yesterday, only more addicted to all of those products and things that they're selling to us. And because they're asking us to be that, we can very easily just miss the fact that we're being asked to be addicts of their products, addicts of the world around us. And then we take drug and alcohol addicts, people who have drug and alcohol abuse issues, and tell them, you have a problem, I don't. That's why recovering too is so important, because when I can get you as a counselor to understand that you have to get over the idea of Facebook having our answer, the idea of confidence being a problem, all of these things, when we can really start to look at those triggers that are around us and understand that we are being asked to be addicted to these things. And maybe we are. I mean, that's why I like to utilize the word pacifier, so we don't get people's, get people's hair in a bunch just because I'm using addiction. Yes, you're right. Like someone with a hardcore heroin addiction and your Netflix addiction, do we want to compare the two? We definitely don't want to put them on a side-by-side chart, but they can be compared. And we have to be able to understand that so that we can continue our journey of recovery without the judgment of the others. Bringing awareness. Once again, this is the tiny shift we want to make. Bringing awareness, noticing where we're checking out or we're choosing not to engage, helps us recover ourselves. Because once we take awareness of that which is upsetting us, or that which frustrates us, or that which triggers us, we can look inward and find that which we are, that which is frustrating us. And all of this is about perceptions. Under the most favorable circumstances, what responses would you endorse? Right? Like, you might get angry at something. How do you, what response to that which you are getting angry at would you endorse under the best circumstances? Because if you're out there arguing with somebody and you stop and think about it, is that futile? Are you taking an action that is worth your time and energy? Because if you're not, that awareness that you're not engaging in a proper response is going to guide you to understanding yourself more and probably have better relationships. Not with those that want to argue, but you're going to attract and encourage better relationships. So this is all about perceptions. Now, closing the gap. So there is a gap between how we consciously want to respond to something and what we would elect to respond, how we would elect to respond to something, how we would endorse responding to our child, how we would endorse responding to our wife or husband, and how our subconscious coaxes us to respond because of fear, because of, we go from what we call a salient, or what we call the default mode network, to a salient network, meaning we put blinders on, right? So once we put blinders on because we're angry, because we were triggered in some way, once those blinders go on, we can't focus. There is no way we can focus on who we are or what we're doing. We are hijacked by a system of cortisol and a system of response. So to close that gap, we must become aware of how what is happening around us is pointing back to us. How is my response to this? How is my assumption of this interaction pointing back to me and my trauma that put those blinders on? It's oftentimes our partner can tell us one thing and we shut down, and then a friend of ours can tell us the same thing and we're engaged and curious. Why is that? We have to be able to look at how we trust our partner, how we don't trust our partner, and all of those things. And it's about us. It's not about our partner triggering us. It's about how we got triggered because of a perception that we carried about what loved ones do or what my partner has done in the past. It's a very slippery slope, but when we add awareness to it and we say, oh, it's different under these circumstances, why? Let's get curious. Once we start to get curious, we can change the way we respond to those things. So when our partner comes to us, once we deal with that, once we understand, oh, you know what, when you said that to me, it reminded me of my dad telling me I was wrong and and I had this experience that made me ashamed of myself. And when you said that, I got angry and put on my blinders. Now all I can see is you telling me what to do, even though I know deep down you're not trying to tell me what to do. You're just trying to help. When I see my friend and they say the same thing, I don't hear it the same way, right? So all of a sudden, there is a different way I'm perceiving these things. These things are being perceived in two different ways. So if there's anything in the world that we don't like, we have to be able to look at ourselves and say there's something about us we don't like. We have to look at it. We have to say, well, what is that? And then break it down and understand. And we're going to go through an exercise today. In the long version of the workshop, we're going to go through an exercise that helps us find these things, understand them, and get curious about them. So I'm excited about that. So before we move on any further, I want to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because this conversation is not for everyone. If you're well in your life and you're doing well and you have this love and belonging, safety, and you're moving into esteem and all of that, great. This conversation can be had openly and easily. If you don't have a place to live, if you don't have clean water, if you don't have, if those things are immediate threats to your existence and to your life, this conversation should not and cannot be had. You cannot find somebody that does not have clean water and say, well, let's get you curious. Okay, we can have that conversation, but let's get them some water first. um, that's what that's a big part, and that's not something that I'm missing. It is something that I want to kind of, I don't want to gloss over it, but I don't want to stay on this topic. We have to understand, once we are adding it to our lives, we're going to know who can talk about it, and we can't be forceful. You can't force someone to understand that it is how they perceive the world that is making them respond to the world. But when we know that, we can plant seeds and we can have communications with these individuals that are in lower on the having less of the or dipping into the lower areas of Maslow's hierarchy of needs more often, because you can, this is a continuum. Like, I can feel physically like physically I might not have a home, but I can very much contribute to my society. Still, I can contribute to my, my neighborhood. Maybe I have to not have a home for a time because, financially things are rough. I actually currently am living in my mom's home, so I don't have a home. I am physically in a place, but there are rules and ideas that I have to abide by that are not necessarily mine. So wanting to get out of that and be under my own roof is something that is high on my priority list. But that doesn't mean I'm not contributing and esteem. Like, it's just different parts of your lives can fall in different places. So, but if your life is under a circumstance where you can't get your head above water, this conversation is not for them. We can hint and we can plant some seeds, but that's as much as we can do, because having this conversation with someone like that, they will utilize it to go back to their drugs, go back to their pacifiers and addictions. And so we want to make sure that we're being very, very specific about what we're learning here today, and understand that it is not for everybody, but it is for us as counselors, as people who are healthy in the world and contributing of ourselves. So this is where we're going to break off from the traditional, like, first hour of the workshop. We're going to break off, and the next step would be going through triggers and understanding those, and going through an exercise in which we can learn more about what it means to recover yourself and how to do that. For those of you that are interested, please sign up for my future workshops. I have 3 more this month, every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central Time. So, like in 15 minutes, like that would be, it would be 10 a.m. Central Time. So yeah, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you. And my name is MartinJon, the recovery mentor, and I host the Recover Yourself podcast, which you can find anywhere you listen to podcasts, and on my website, MartinJon, MartinJon.com. Thank you so much. Have a great day.